A nurse returning from Sierra Leone, forcibly quarantined, then released. The U.S. government hired over 1,000 Nazis to work for the CIA, the FBI, and the U.S. military. And devout Muslim lone wolf attacks. We'll talk about all of this on today's Voice of Resistance.
Those who forsake the law praise the wicked. Those who uphold the law resist them. Welcome to the Voice of Resistance. Here's your host, Randall Terry.
The old adage, a broken clock is right twice a day. Well, Andrew Cuomo, governor of New York, and Chris Christie, governor of New Jersey, held a joint press conference last weekend, and they said, we're going to quarantine people for 21 days if they are a health care worker who comes from one of the three nations with the infectious diseases. Now, I want to say for the record, because it's important, both of these men would like to be president. And Andrew Cuomo is one of the most despicable men in politics today. He is Roman Catholic and yet cohabitates with his girlfriend, promotes same-gender weddings, wants unfettered child killing through all 9 months of pregnancy. This man is a villain. And sadly, Cardinal Dolan up in New York has not had the courage to just say to him, look, you can't present yourself for communion. If you're going to behave like this publicly, you cannot come to communion. But I digress. Chris Christie, on the other hand, I think is just a little bit more conniving, a little bit more deceitful, and a little bit more opportunistic as he plays to the right wing of the Republican Party. But at the end of the day, I believe that he is a wolf in sheep's clothing, an establishment Republican who would use the issues that matter to us to get our vote, but has no intention whatsoever of altering the course that this nation is on. Having said that, for both of them, they had a joint press conference and they said, we're going to quarantine healthcare workers. So the first lady to fall into their new guidelines is this woman, Casey Hickox. She was returning from Sierra Leone and was around many people who were sick with Ebola. She wrote a piece for the Dallas Morning News in which she recounts giving Tylenol and some other medication to a young girl trying to suppress her fever. The girl died. She was with her. Her family wasn't with her. Some heart-wrenching stories. So she was held in the Newark airport, and it was clear that the Newark airport officials did not know what to do, all right? So President Obama's assertions that we have all this in order, it's laughable. She ended up being there for 7 hours, forcibly detained, all right? And they gave her a granola bar and some water to drink, all right? So she was quite upset with it. And one person after another, some who identified themselves, some who didn't, came in and questioned her and questioned her and questioned her. Finally, she was taken to a hospital with 8 police cars, all right, sirens and lights, 8 police cars in a convoy taking her to a hospital where she was admitted to a tent. They put her outside, I'm not making this up, in a tent. Now, it was climate controlled, so they'd rigged up some AC, so that was nice of them. But it didn't have a shower. It didn't have running water. They had that little, like, plastic, go on a camping trip toilet for her to relieve herself. And she was not a happy camper. So she wrote a piece for the Dallas Morning News. And I've got to read some of these responses to you because as I scrolled through them, there was over 5,000 comments. 98% of the people who responded were blistering her for complaining. You look, lady, you went, you served these people, God bless you, but now you have to deal with the consequences. You cannot just come here and risk infecting your fellow Americans. Here's some of what people said. While not highly infectious, why don't you show some compassion and understanding to those in the U.S. who are nervous and concerned, rightly or wrongly, than lashing out While not highly infectious, why don't you show some compassion and understanding on us? Another person said, she's narcissistic and selfish. Another person wrote, if Washington bleeding heart liberals do not want to back a quarantine, maybe they can invite her. They can invite the returning healthcare workers to their home. Well, over the weekend, the White House weighed in and pressured Cuomo and pressured Christie Todd Whitman. And they said, all right, well, let's clarify our position. They have to be quarantined for 21 days, but it can be in their own home. All right? Then this morning on the news, you had national press saying that healthcare professionals and Washington insiders are alarmed at the way she was treated. You know, I'll say this in closing. I think that quarantining them is a right thing to do. It's an ethical thing to do, because as much as they want to tell us they have this under control, they don't. And as much as they want to tell us that they have this disease down pat, I'm not sure that that's true, as we've seen from the CDC. But to put a woman in a tent without a shower, that's just stupid. I mean, you're going to have to pay for this gear anyway. Why not run? My son, my 12-year-old son says, Dad, why don't they just rent some cabins? Some nice cabins in a little country setting and put them in there for 21 days. I mean, good grief, if a 12-year-old can figure it out, it's going to be a lot cheaper than building a makeshift quarantine tent, and at least she can go to the potty properly and take a shower.
You have two choices. I mean, you can try to raise your children by design, or you will raise them by default. There are no perfect parents. We're going to get it wrong sometimes. If we have a plan, we've got a better chance of getting it right in the long run.
There is something deep within the heart of every human being that longs for parental acceptance and approval. When does a boy become a man?
Get a group of guys around and ask them that question.
I don't think there's a certain age. Some men stay boys their whole life.
I would say, 16, 18 years old.
Wow, that's a good question.
When they get bar mitzvah?
Well, I think when he has a child. So I just became at 56, 56 years old.
Without the power of the Holy Spirit changing us and giving us power over our sin, we can't hope to be the dads that our kids need us to be.
What is the use of living, if it be not to strive for noble causes and to make this muddled world a better place to live after we are gone? Sir Winston Churchill. Lone wolf attacks. That's what they're calling them now, because they don't know what else to call them. You might have seen the news over the weekend about a man named Zale Thompson in New York City who took a hatchet that he had concealed, and when he saw 4 policemen standing together having their pictures taken, he rushed at them. One of them, he swung at his head, and the officer put up his arm. Then he turned the blade on another officer and hit him in the head, and this officer at this time is in critical but stable condition. He was trying to decapitate them, okay? And when the attack first happened, of course, they said, well, this has nothing to do with Islam. He's not a Muslim. He's not a terrorist. He has no terrorist connection, etc. Then they started to read his Facebook page and saw these images in Arabic. And they said, oops, he is, in fact, a recent convert to Islam. And he has been reading some of the more radical elements of Islam online. So now they're calling them self-radicalized. Folks, we have to come to the place where we will see the truth for what it is, all right? If you study the life of Muhammad, you'll see all kinds of lone wolf attacks. Individual men who, following what Muhammad wanted them to do, went and killed someone. There's a story of a Muslim whom Muhammad gave permission to him to lie, to get near an associate, a business associate of him. In another example, a man lured another man into a cave where they were going to spend the night, hang out. They built a little fire, they were eating, and he convinced his soon-to-be victim that he didn't like Muhammad. And so the other man let loose with a stream of invectives against Muhammad and was laughing and mocking Muhammad and singing songs against Muhammad. Well, that man took an arrow and drove it through the eye into the brain of his soon-to-be murdered victim. He then went back to Medina and reported to Muhammad what he had done, and Muhammad belly laughed. The murderer said that he could see Muhammad's white teeth in the back of his mouth. He was laughing so loud and with his mouth open so wide. Muhammad thought this was great. So the lone wolf attacks started happening in the lifetime of Muhammad, with his permission, with his blessing, with his encouragement. Now just compare that, just to make the point, of lone sheep attacks. See, they're commenting that these murderers from Canada and this man in New York City and the murderer in Oklahoma who cut off the head of that woman, God rest her soul, these lone wolves had come into contact with Muhammad. They were recent converts, and then they carried out the deadly deeds of Islam, right, that were exemplified and called for with Muhammad. Think of what a lone sheep attack looks like, a recent convert to Jesus, right? I call it a lone sheep attack just because we all know what it is. Somebody who converts, you might have been one of those lone sheep. Someone converts to Christ, and what do? They just start preaching to everyone. They want to tell everyone, you've got to find Christ. They start telling people they shouldn't drink, they shouldn't smoke, they shouldn't go to the movies, depending on what brand of Protestant Christianity they find themselves in. They'll tell them they can't dance anymore. So, compare the lone sheep attacks of Christianity to the lone wolf attacks of Islam. And at least they're calling them wolves. I mean, at least they got that right. These are wolves, the wolves of Islam, the lone wolves of Islam. And the tragedy is that it's never going to go away as long as Islam is on this earth and there are people who can quote Muhammad and quote the Quran and quote the Hadith. It's just not going to go away. It is a curse on the face of the earth that has been here for 1,400 years. And now we're just beginning to feel it because all of this horror and violence over the course of these centuries was primarily in the areas where the Islamic Empire had its breadth and stretch and was able to impose Sharia law. You know, Snowden is saying, look, they're spying on all of us, which clearly they are. Why don't these people at the CIA and the FBI and various law enforcement agencies start looking at people like this? If they're scrolling through Facebook pages and they see Arabic, that might be a clue. Oh, but that would be profiling. Right. So what you're saying is that profiling might just be common sense, but you're too politically correct to do the right thing? Well, are you saying that all Muslims are violent? No, clearly they're not. Clearly they're not. There's a lot of bad Muslims out there. A lot of moderate Muslims who aren't following the dictates of Muhammad. But just remember, like the Sarnoff brothers in Boston who did the Boston bombing, they're only one or two hadiths away, one or two verses of the Quran away. So maybe, rather than trying to gather all this data on everyone, they should be looking at people who pose an actual real-time threat. Maybe the attacks in Canada or Oklahoma City or New York City wouldn't have happened if they weren't using so many man-hours to just do the dragnet on everybody. God save us from the stupidity of our own government. But in our next segment, I'll tell you how that they hired Nazis. I mean, ethics evidently don't matter, and certainly profiling doesn't matter if they're going to use Nazis.
Hey, everyone's been asking me, when's Unstoppable coming out on DVD? Well, it's here. And I have created my own deluxe signature version of Unstoppable that contains not only the movie, but over 5 hours of additional curriculum and study guides for your family. It's perfect for your homeschool, educational facility, small group Bible study, and family devotions. And I'm going to share with you some of the spiritual warfare that surrounded the release of this film. This box set also includes extended scenes, new music videos, the inside scoop on the whole Facebook controversy. So what are you waiting for? I made this special version with my family in mind, and I know your family will be blessed by it too. Unstoppable 2.0 Deluxe Signature Version, available only here at KurtCameron.com. I can't wait for you to experience what's inside.
So for those of you who think my country right or wrong, and for those of you who want to at least look at our government through some type of ethical prism or ethical lens, there is a large story out right now that it's going to cause a lot of hubbub. And the reason is because people are going to start to ask, well, if we did it then, are we doing it now? And I'm speaking about the fact that the CIA, the FBI, and various parts of the U.S. military, after World War I, recruited and hired over 1,000 known Nazis to work for the U.S. government, primarily for national security interests. In other words, they were using them as spies because the communists had taken over East Germany and the whole Soviet bloc was growing, and we needed agents, so said the CIA, and we needed informants, so said the FBI, who would work with us. So we put them on the payroll, and we looked the other way. Now, to give you background real quick, this man, he was an SS officer, Otto von Boschwing. He was a mentor of and a top aide to this man, Adolf Eichmann, who history records as the architect of the final solution to kill millions of Jews. Do you understand the severity of this? He was a top aide to Adolf Eichmann. That means he was right there on the ground helping carry out plans to kill hundreds of thousands, millions of innocent men, women, and children, whose only fault was an accident of birth, as Winston Churchill called it. His son, Gus Van Bolschwing, in an article with the New York Times, said that they should have never let him into this country. So what they did was they hired him, used him as a spy in Eastern Europe until 1954. Then they moved him to America and let him retire in New York City. And the CIA's official memo said that he had innocuous activities with the Nazi Party. Innocuous activities? Then there was this man. So this fellow they hired for $1,700 a year and 2 cartons of cigarettes a month. Now he was involved in murdering 60,000 Jews in Lithuania, machine gunning them, okay? It came out in the early 90s because there were still government agencies in the U.S. who did not know that the CIA was involved with these guys, that found him and set the wheels in motion to deport him, which ultimately they did. But the CIA called up the FBI and said, you cannot prosecute this man. So they came to an understanding that if it ever came out in the courtroom that he worked as a CIA informant and he was on the CIA payroll, that they would shut down the case. That was the deal they cut. Well, it never came out. And the CIA's official line at that time was that they had no knowledge of his activities during the war, which was a total lie. They knew that he was involved in murdering 60,000 people. So here's a couple of ethical questions. Number one, the scripture says, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. What would you want done if your murderers were being offered a job with the CIA or the FBI? Do the dead have rights? Should they have been brought to justice? I mean, we had those trials at Nuremberg. Deuteronomy chapter 21 talks about blood guilt. That if you know who murdered somebody, you are required to bring them to justice, or the blood of the victims cries out from the ground to God, and God will bring judgment. What about the idea of my country, right or wrong? Do ethics matter? Consider Jeremiah. I mean, we're dual citizens, all right? We have a citizenship in heaven and a citizenship here on earth, and our allegiance to heaven is first. The prophet Jeremiah kept saying, Babylon is going to win, and if you surrender to them, you'll live. Well, the authorities finally arrested him and said, look, he's a traitor. He's demoralizing the troops. We got to kill this guy. Ultimately, Jeremiah was rescued, and he survived, but Jeremiah was standing with God. Jeremiah was standing with his allegiance to the kingdom of heaven first. And you and I have an obligation to stand with God and with his laws and with the kingdom of heaven first, not second. It's not my country, right or wrong. Allegiance to God first, then country. And when our country is wrong, we need to say so. This was abominable. And some people say, well, how many lives were saved? They're not even saying that this was an ethical problem at the time. These guys weren't being hired because, well, we know that if we hire him and put him right here, he'll save 10,000 lives on this boat transporter. They'll save 500 lives on this air flotilla. This was just, we wanted data. We wanted spies during the Cold War. That's it. It's despicable. And it makes you wonder, what's our government doing right now? I mean, a government that allows the murder of babies, a government that won't recognize the danger of lone wolf Muslims, a government that is pushing for militant homosexuals to undermine and overthrow the covenant and sacrament of marriage, a government that is spying on its own citizens while allowing lone wolves of Islam to emerge. What's our government doing now with the ex-Nazis of today? I'll be right back. I have been a leader in the pro-life movement for 30 years, and sadly we have not prevailed in our goal to make it a criminal act to kill an unborn baby. There's reasons why we have failed. I wrote this book, A Humble Plea, to Catholic bishops, to evangelical clergy, and to lay people, explaining where we went wrong and what we have to do to prevail. We've made this available as a PDF online for free. I encourage you to go and download your own copy. We have put together what we call an online university for you. Now that's a highfalutin way of saying that we have a pretty significant library of material, books, tapes, videos that are there for you for free. Why are we doing this? Because America is desperate for new leaders, and because this material could help you to become the leader that you and God want you to be. Check it out and enjoy it. I have no fear of the future. Let us go forward into its mysteries. Let us tear aside the veils which hide it from our eyes, and let us move onward with confidence and courage. Sir Winston Churchill. The hereditary title of the President of the United States, should it now pass to the Bush dynasty. Maybe you've heard the news that Jeb Bush, former governor of Florida, brother of George W. Bush, son of George Herbert Walker Bush, the two former presidents, 41 and 43, that he is considering becoming number 45, and he's moving in that direction. Boy, oh boy, I don't like this man. By the way, I'm not at all opposed to a family that in our constitutional democracy produces great leaders and great presidents. Wouldn't bother me a bit. The problem is he doesn't have the right stuff. Randall, what are you talking about? Terry Schiavo. Terry Schiavo is dead because of Jeb Bush's fear.